Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning briefing for Thursday, the 7th of August, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. Let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway. Robert, good morning. Prominent Democrats, you say, are pushing the party to withhold spending votes. That's in, I guess, protest to the Trump administration. What's going on?
Good morning, Mike. That's correct. This is coming from Senator Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, and Chris Murphy, and they're urging Senate Democrats to withhold their votes on these must-pass spending bills that are due by the 30th of September. I have also seen where Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries are trying to get deals done by leveraging these votes in the Senate that Republicans need to pass these spending bills to avoid a partial government shutdown. I've also seen right before the Senate went on recess, they passed a law enforcement funding bill that had heavy bipartisan support. I think it passed with 89 votes in the Senate, which seems to be a sign that most of the Senate Democrats are not going into effectively a full Trump resistance mode. But there is still a risk of a short partial shutdown if the Democrats do dig their heels in to try to get a deal to stop future spending cuts. And moving over to the Treasury, the Office of Foreign Assets Control issued sanctions against three high-ranking members of and one associate of Cartel del Noreste, which is also known as, or formerly known as Los Zetas. And according to OFAC, ICE also raided a CDN-run nightclub in Charleston, South Carolina in June, which operated as a narcotics, weapons, and human trafficking front. The associate that they name is a self-described narco rapper. I find this interesting because they accuse him of money laundering for the cartel using streaming royalties. Like you would see, like they would receive royalties through services like Spotify. And this is interesting because cartels have had to get pretty creative with money laundering operations in the last few years, including, for example, using MMO, massive multiplayer online games, in-game currency exchanges to launder money back to Mexico and other Latin American countries. Then moving over to the domestic side and staying on the cartel front, former mayor of Santa Lucia in Guatemala, Romeo Ramos Cruz, was extradited to the U.S. this week. And according to the Department of Justice, he was a key member of a Guatemala-based trafficking organization and exploited his elected office to coordinate logistics and transportation for this transnational criminal organization. And I think this is a sign of growing security cooperation in Latin America, even outside of Mexico now. And speaking of Mexico, they launched a new U.S.-trained border unit in the state of Sonora, which Mexican officials have said is the first of its kind. This unit includes 18 Sonora State police officers, and they completed special training with U.S. Customs and Border Protection. And this new unit is going to focus on technology and intelligence operations to enforce border security on the Mexican side of the border.
Hey, Robert, just a quick question. We keep hearing about these tunnels. It's every so often. There's another tunnel in the San Diego sector or some other tunnel, and those start on the Mexico side and they burrow their way over into the U.S. And I would imagine that, I don't know how prevalent those still are, but under the Biden administration, it seemed like every few months there was some new tunnel, and these aren't. I mean, some of these had like steel beams and stuff inside. They're kind of like professionally built tunnels here. So it seems like this is great news all around on the Mexico front, that Mexico's stepping up their portion of border security.
Correct. Yeah, I think this is the focus on technology and intelligence. I think they're talking about especially drone surveillance, which I'm sure is intended to curtail some of that tunneling activity. Because if this is what it looks to be like a pilot program, I'm sure Mexico and the Trump administration will try to expand this to other sectors of the border.
Mm-hmm. Good news. All right, thanks for that.
And staying on the border, the National Counterterrorism Center announced the arrest of Sinaloa cartel leader Jaime Rene Huerca Casavantes, and this was at the port of entry in El Paso, Texas. Casavantes, according to the NCTC, escaped from a U.S. federal prison in 1997 and then fled to Mexico, where he's been orchestrating large-scale trafficking and money laundering operations for not just the Sinaloa cartel, but other transnational criminal organizations for the last 2 decades. And then Arizona State Senate President Warren Peterson, who's a Republican, said that he referred State Senator Annalise Ortiz, a Democrat, to the U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona. And Peterson said that it looked, according to his statement, like Ortiz had violated federal law by interfering with ICE immigration enforcement operations. This was after Ortiz said that she had been using social media to alert illegal immigrants in Arizona to ICE enforcement operations in the area.
Mhm.
And then,
Hey, Robert, just real quick, is that against the law, or is that going to be against the law? Because every so often, haven't there been court cases where someone will be flicking their headlights, their high beams into oncoming traffic when they see there's a speed trap, and they're just a friendly thing to do. And I think the courts have ruled that that's actually freedom of speech, and that's not actually impeding law enforcement. Don't quote me on that. I just seem to recall that. But there are entire apps, there are entire websites, entire organizations like Ice Watch that are dedicated to taking in crowdsourced information. See something, say something. You see an ICE van, post it in the app. Is that a free speech issue, or is the DOJ maybe going to make that into some kind of criminal issue?
I think the first step from the DOJ is going to be some type of civil suit, which is what they've been, I think, primarily pursuing against other local and state Democrats that they have claimed have interfered with immigration enforcement. And I think that's the first step, because there's a lower bar of evidence effectively to get some kind of civil settlement, or I think they believe they can get some of these Democrats to state level Democrats to basically knock it off under threat of like a civil suit, rather than trying to pursue criminal charges.
Mm-hmm. All right. Interesting. Thanks for that.
And then finally, American Nuclear Power Company, General Matter, said it signed a lease with the Department of Energy Tuesday, and they said they're going to establish the first U.S.-owned and privately developed uranium enrichment facility. This is going to be at the former Paducah Gaseous Diffusion Plant, Kentucky. Interestingly, General Matter said the plant will begin operations by the end of the decade, and the goal is to end reliance on foreign adversaries for nuclear fuel that powers 20% of the U.S. grid.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's also good news domestically. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's go ahead and move on to the global sit rep. And Jared, we've talked a lot about the carrot, talked a lot about the stick. Trump just likes using the stick, and he's raised tariffs again, most recently on India. And what now?
Sure did. Well, actually, that was on India again. So India's up to an additional 50%. And this is because they continue to buy Russian oil, and Trump's trying to make an example out of them for Russia's remaining trade partners, saying, hey, I'm going to keep raising it on them. You guys get in line by Friday, or I'm hitting you too. So really trying to get everybody onto the same page here. And concurrent to this, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who does tons of diplomacy over in this region on behalf of the United States, met with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, he's doing this to try to beat that Friday deadline, actually achieve a ceasefire, and prevent everybody else from getting potentially 100% tariffs, because that's what Trump initially threatened. Now, Russian and American officials, they refused to discuss details, but they both described it as constructive and making great progress toward actually achieving a ceasefire. So we will see. Secretary Rubio was interviewed about it, but he refused to say what kind of timelines we were looking at here.
Hey, just Jared, briefly, what is the response from India, or has the response from India changed? Because I recall seeing Indian officials saying, we don't care. We're going to continue buying Russian oil because we need it. They have 1 billion people in their country. What I would just say this, one of the, people talk a lot about unintended consequences. And back in 22, those sanctions under the Biden administration on Russia, one thing that, and also from the EU and NATO countries, one of the things that happened is EU exports to Russia stopped. And that included a lot of food products from Europe that no longer went to Russia. And for a while, Russia had some empty shelves due to this. The Indians stepped in, and the Indians actually ramped up their food product exports to Russia. And I remember reading that, and I said, well, we're basically pushing Russia and India much closer together as well, not just Russia and China. And so it seems like the continued stick approach, to my knowledge, has not really worked against India so far. So what's India saying now in response to these tariffs?
Well, so in the words they're using, they've technically softened a little bit. They went from saying, "Hey, this is a matter of sovereignty. We're not listening to you. We're not, subject to you. We are our own nation." To, well, this is unfair. This is unreasonable. Technically, that's a softening. It may just be that they got tired of saying we're sovereign for a bit, and they're going to go back to it, which leads perfectly right into the next piece that Modi's conducting his first state level visit to China since 2018. They obviously, China and India have been on the outs for quite some time over the border dispute they've got, but Modi is scheduled to visit China for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's head of state meeting at the end of this month and the very first day of September. Now, like I said, this will be first state level visit since 2018. He did meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the BRICS summit back in 2024, though. So it's not the first time they've met in almost a decade, but it is the first time in a very long time he's actually went to China. And they were already thawing their relationship. So I think we will see a bit more of India moving toward China, at least, not treating it like a main security threat, which threatens the stability of the quadrilateral dialogue, by the way.
Jared, it still seems to me like China remains India's top major power. Of course, they have this thing with Pakistan, but is this an actual shift from India, or is this just a visit?
I think it's right now just a visit. I'm not saying that India will view China as like a friend or an ally or anything like that. I'm saying they're going to stop treating them as like somebody trying to take territory from them, because for the moment, nobody's fighting over that border. It's disputed, but nobody's fighting. They're actively trying to improve their relations, and India's other main partner, the United States, is tariffing them. They're saying, no, they're actually taking disciplinary action against them. So India, being India, will absolutely try to go, okay, well, we're going to play both sides. We're going to get friendly with China, even if they don't like China at all. That's just kind of how India operates. They're always India first, always.
Sure.
So if they think they can play one power off another, they will.
All right. Let's go ahead and move on to the Philippines. We've seen from a number of Indo-Pacific countries that they fully expect this conflict over Taiwan to happen. And that's what the Philippines is saying now, correct?
Absolutely. And we've heard a similar statement from lesser Philippine officials, like their chief of staff, but coming directly from the Philippine president now. He told Indian media yesterday that due to their closeness to, like, physical closeness to Taiwan, and also the large Philippine diaspora over in Taiwan, there's no way the Philippines can avoid being involved. It will have to get involved to extract its people and potentially protect its people during a war between Taiwan and China. That means the Philippines will probably fight China. Marcos also expressed confidence that the United States would defend the Philippines if China challenged it in the West Philippine Sea, which is now, depending on which sphere of influence you're in, the official name of the South China Sea. You're going to hear those terms interchanged a lot when dealing with Philippine media. Mm-hmm. Then moving on down, staying in the Indo-Pacific, the Australian federal government and two of their state governments are investing 135 million Australian dollars, which is just shy of 90 million US dollars, into a couple of their smelters. Now, these are smelters that were on their way out. They were, being shut down just due to funding issues. They're trying to prevent that. But at the same time, the governments are telling them, you will also fast track feasibility studies into critical minerals production. They're focused on 4 main minerals here: antimony, bismuth, germanium, and indium. 3 of these we've talked about extensively. Antimony is extremely important, comes out of China. Germanium, cut off from China. Indium actually comes from India. But regardless, you need smelting. You need to produce these. And all of this is not directly said that it is a follow-up to the quadrilateral dialogue's critical mineral initiative, but functionally it is. This is the Australians taking the first step to say, yes, we will be the critical mineral supply hub for the rest of the alliance.
Hmm. Well, yeah, that's great news considering China has also been slow walking. China, under this initial trade agreement, they're supposed to free up and unban some of these exports to the United States. And to my understanding, they haven't done it yet. Either that or they're just slow walking it, just being extremely slow. But Jared, at some point, if you're China, it does not make sense to export this stuff to the United States when it's going to be put in bombs that could be dropped on your Navy at some point in maybe the next couple of years. So, all right, thanks for that. All right, now let's turn to this last item here. Chile is ramping up their dollar reserves. I think I know why. It should be pretty obvious. But what are the details?
So this is coming from Chile's central bank. They're going to begin a 3-year program to daily buy $25 million worth of US dollars at the daily exchange rate until they reach about $18.5 billion. So this program, they do expect to do every 6 months review just for relevant changes in the market. So, adjust as needed in order to actually hit their goals. But I thought this was particularly interesting because we don't normally see people announcing, hey, we're increasing our dollar reserves anymore. Not to say it's not happening, just you don't see the announcements normally. And this is coming from Chile, who we've covered it pretty extensively. They're, going very anti-American, at least until we see what happens with this presidential election.
Yes, Gabriel Boric is a leftist. The one reason, I think maybe the clearest reason why they're doing this is because they do not want those copper tariffs on Chilean copper. Chile is the world's top copper producer and exporter, and that's been a big thing for their economy. And so I imagine, there's been all this talk about, the dollar is doomed and the dollar is about to go to zero and no one wants the dollar anymore. No one's using the dollar. And actually that could not be, eventually, sure, the dollar's going to zero on a long enough timeline. But that data actually does not bear this out. The percentage of foreign exchange trade settlements is still at historic highs. Foreign exchange trades settled in U.S. dollars, still at historic highs. So plenty of people are still using the dollar. And I would imagine that ramping up these dollar reserves is one way for Chile probably to create demand for the dollar and also maybe get Trump to come down on these tariffs. All right, so thanks for that. And with that, let's go ahead and move on. 70 protests today. Again, if you see your area, go ahead and head over to forwardobserver.com. This is one thing that we do for members. We track all the protests, not just the generic progressive left-wing protests, which occur every day, but also far left, direct action, training, anything that we can find, we throw up on the map to keep you situationally aware of what's happening in your locale. Forwardobserver.com. Sign up for a free 7-day trial, get access to that, and stay ahead of the curve. And then also, let's talk about this next national economic and labor boycott. So this thing is called Black Out the System, and you see the 3 fingers there. And if you've ever seen Hunger Games, I guess that's where that comes from. I don't know. Seems a little over the top to me. However, maybe we're headed there. Left-wing organizers are now promoting this 5-day national economic and labor boycott, which begins on the 16th of September and runs to the 20th. And this is also going to coincide with Constitution Day on 17 September. So this is why they've chosen this week. Participants are asked to update their W-4 tax forms to tax-exempt status so that they temporarily stop paying their taxes. This was a big thing. They're basically saying stop sending tax money to the federal government. They're also encouraging participants to show up to work, but work slowly and don't do anything more than the absolute minimum required. They're calling on participants to remove their money from major banks and, of course, avoid making purchases of any kind, including fuel and eating out at restaurants. The group's demands include the removal of the Trump administration, a national living wage, expanded social programs, accountability for law enforcement and politicians, and also release of the Epstein files. On the whole, mostly not bad. I would say this, just in terms of why it matters. We have seen numerous attempts at organizing boycotts this year. There was one that I recall that I think actually did lead to a noticeable drop in one-day sales. However, all they did is they created a drop in 1 day sales because they just bought everything that they're going to buy. They just bought it in the days prior to the boycott. And so the actual effect was probably quite low. However, I look at this as not necessarily a dry run, but you look at the protests, okay, largely toothless. You look at these boycotts, okay, largely toothless, but they do get people involved. And I think we're still in the training wheels part of this. Actually, I don't have the book here, but I'm reading a book on left-wing power and struggle, written by the same type of people who are promoting the color revolution stuff, the kind of popular revolution stuff, the mass resistance movement that I've been talking about for so long. At any rate, I'm reading this book, and one of the things they're talking about is the use of boycotts. And so I look at this as kind of the toothless protest version. And eventually we'll probably not be any longer in the toothless protest version. Eventually, we're probably looking at a general strike in 2028, probably looking at strategic boycotts. And, all this stuff is about strategic non-cooperation. It is about removing the levers of support for a government, or in this case, for the Trump administration, on the theory that if you weaken enough pillars, if you remove enough support through non-cooperation, then you will eventually weaken, and this is just according to their theory, you will weaken a regime or a dictator and precipitate the collapse of that dictatorship. This is the strategy that they are pursuing. This is why we are seeing the boycotts. And I do expect these boycotts to get much worse in the future as other efforts also start to ramp up. For instance, when these left-wing groups stop doing these national days of protest, and it actually turns into national days of direct action or national days of intervention with millions of people engaging in civil disobedience and nonviolent direct action, that is on the way. That will happen in the future. We're just not there yet. Training wheels, probably the third inning, I would say, of a 9-inning baseball game. And with that, let's go ahead and move on here to the gerrymander war watch. So there does seem to be an important update here, Robert, and this is the one thing that I think will be an accelerator. I don't think it's going to be a trigger, but this probably will be, if this actually ends up happening, will be a major accelerant of a domestic conflict that we could have here in this country over the next several years. So, Robert, what's the latest?
Well, yesterday, President Donald Trump said that the FBI may have to help return Texas Democrats who fled the state to block that new mid-decade congressional map. And this was in response to a media question after Senator John Cornyn formally requested the FBI's assistance in locating these Texas Democrats, which, yeah, I agree. This is, I think, going to be seen as a major escalation in this growing political conflict. FBI cooperation with Texas officials would likely also increase resistance from the inside, from these Biden-era federal career officials who have been coordinating, as we've previously reported, with Trump resistance organizations like Democracy AID to engage in that strategic non-cooperation. Mm-hmm. And then, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, no, I was just going to mention South Carolina now has said they are going to start looking at this mid-districting effort as well, correct?
This is coming from Rep. Ralph Norman, who is going to leave the House. He's going to be running for governor of South Carolina in 2026. And he said that South Carolina could pass a map that would eliminate the single Democrat seat in the state, which is currently held by Representative Jim Clyburn. Norman has said he's running for governor, so if it doesn't happen ahead of 2026, I think it's likely to happen ahead of 2028 if Ralph Norman does win the governorship. I think this is also dependent on that Supreme Court decision over the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, because Jim Clyburn is a majority-minority district, and if they try to eliminate that, that's going to run into a major block if they try to do it ahead of that Supreme Court decision.
Mm-hmm. And then finally here, we've heard from a former DNC chair, that this gerrymandering is their top issue for 2028. I wonder why is it not their top issue for 2026, Robert?
Well, he's saying this specifically for any blue state governor who's planning to run for president. And this was in response to comments coming from Gavin Newsom. But I did see in December of 2024, there was a huge meeting after the election of a bunch of blue state governors in California. And that was characterized by some Democratic advisors as effectively an audition for the 2028 primary. So I think with Texas unlikely to back down on this fight, any blue state governor that considers throwing their hat in the ring in 2028 is going to face pressure from state Democrats and their own federal congressional delegations to push some of these extreme partisan gerrymandering maps in blue states. There are some obstacles because some of the blue state governors that attended that meeting included like Colorado Governor Jared Polis and Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro was there, Andy Beshear, Kathy Hochul, and a lot of these blue states, especially Colorado and Pennsylvania, who I've not seen any comments about them moving toward making effectively a stronger Democrat map in those states, is because they have even stronger legal hurdles to overcome than California and New York. And I think I think that is those two states, especially, I think might be some of the next states to join this fight. Colorado, I think more likely, because in Pennsylvania, there seems to be sort of a bipartisan resistance to getting involved in this because they have apparently a much more transparent and stronger independent map commission than some of these other blue states.
Mm-hmm. All right. So looking at the map now, was New Mexico on there yesterday?
Yes, they've.
Oh, okay.
There's been talk about that, but there's not a lot they can really do. They already effectively have a full Democrat delegation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what they're trying to do, or what they've been talking about, is making the map much more strong for Democrats, because what they did was after the 2020 census, between the 2020 2022 elections, it used to be a 2-1 Democrat to Republican state, and they actually cracked one of the methods of gerrymandering is cracking districts, is effectively breaking up voting blocks. And what was once a reliable Republican seat was cracked in 2021 to create an additional reliable Democrat seat. So I'm not sure exactly what they can actually do, but there has been some talk about a new map.
Okay, fair enough. And thanks for the background on that. All right, so just to look at what's current, Texas and Ohio look to be the only two Republican states so far that are actually taking steps to do this, and then you have a handful right behind them. And then on the other side, what's that? New York and Maryland.
Correct. And so New York, both of those states have passed what is effectively a second strike law. They're introducing a second strike law, effectively saying that if another state introduces a mid-decade map, then they are authorized to also push for their own new congressional map. Because both of those states have a lot of these Democrat states have pushed this independent commission model. In actuality, a lot of them are very heavily partisan. Like in the New York example, they have an independent districting commission, but they have in the past pushed very heavily Democratic favored maps.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's just cover two questions and comments here. With SCOTUS looking at the gerrymandering issue next session, the redrawing of districts may be moot. Robert, is that a fair point? I guess the first thing is SCOTUS looking at this gerrymandering thing? We know they're looking at the majority-minority district thing, the race-based districts. Are they looking at this gerrymandering?
I think that's what this question is referencing, is the Voting Rights Act, the majority-minority district question, because I haven't seen that. So the reason why Texas has a lot of confidence, I think, in pushing this new map is because there is a previous precedent set by the Supreme Court. I think it was in 2018, where John Roberts, I think, wrote the opinion. He basically said the Supreme Court and the federal courts don't have jurisdiction over these state level decisions on map making when it comes to partisan gerrymandering specifically. The only thing they're considering now is the hearing. The oral argument, I think, is going to happen in the next month or two over the majority minority districting, which
right.
wouldn't make it moot. Would actually, it looks like they're leaning toward effectively striking down that Voting Rights Act Section 2 that would actually hand back potentially some seats to the Republicans in some of the states where Democrats have used the Voting Rights Act to force basically guaranteed Democratic seats in those states.
All right, and then this other thing, other comment from Clark says this is stupid. Focus on the citizenship question, and I guess the reason why they're not doing this, or I guess the reason why Trump wants to pursue this, is because the citizenship question is not going to affect things until 2031, that reapportionment and redistricting period post the 2030 census, and Trump needs action for the 2026 midterms. Clark, I tell you, I agree with you. I think this is I agree with you in that this is introducing some political instability, and I'm not gonna. Well, I'm just gonna say this: you follow this to the ends of its logical conclusion, and this could be extremely significant. I mean, this could basically remake the entire political landscape of the country, most of the country. Really solidify also this red state, blue state stuff. All right, Robert, on that topic, is there any other reason other than the 26 midterms why Trump is not just going to wait until to do the citizenship question?
Well, I think it's because they see that as a good chance that it fails. I mean, you did last time. The courts put off the question until Biden took office, and then he effectively withdrew that potential rule to add the citizenship question to the census. And I think the Trump administration, while they are, as far as I've been able to tell, they have not dropped the push to add that question. I think they see it as this move for 2026, or this move for the mid-decade redistricting is kind of a fallback plan for that, because there's a good chance that it does get held up by the courts.
Yeah, I would say nothing's a slam dunk for sure. All right, Robert, thanks for that. And let's go ahead and move on here to the Pacific Fence. All right, Jared, what's going on here?
Okay, so every once in a while, Pacific Island forums, they crop up as important. I want to preface this. Economically, they're very small, and militarily, they're very small players. The main thing here is where they are geographically. That's why we've got this graphic up. They can interrupt everything because there are thousands of little islands and atolls that disrupt everything. So the Pacific Island Forum is not quite like an EU for these sets of islands, but similar in function. They actually collaborate here. Normally, you see major players like Taiwan, China, United States, Japan showing up, giving their advice, offering all kinds of incentives. The Solomon Islands, who's hosting the forum this year, said, nope, none of you will come. None of our 21 partners will show up here. It's just going to be members. Okay. Now, he did say this is just a deferral until the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat can actually complete their tiering system for partners in the region. Now, where exactly they're going to preference partners is up for debate. And this forum is extremely split between pro-China, pro-Taiwan, and then even secondary powers like Japan and Australia. They sometimes have preference for those instead of the major powers. It gets messy. Additionally, and to that point, members of the forum previously questioned outside influence on the forum at all, because China forced the entire forum to change references to Taiwan in their joint communique last year, which set off a ton of members. Because there are some that still recognize Taiwan as the only China. Now, the main reason to focus on this is, as you can see, Australia and New Zealand are part of this. They're also on the other side of all of these islands. If this island chain, series of island chains is infiltrated by China, heavily influenced by China, China can use this to either gain early warning on any kind of supply chains running between Australia and the United States, or even potentially disrupt it, depending on the size of the island, if they can station something there that's offensive in nature. However, due to the structure of the Pacific Island Forum, the neutral stance that the Solomon Islands is forcing upon it actually benefits the United States. The reason for this is that A, two of our allies are in there, Australia and New Zealand. So we have a voice, a very important voice at that, because both of those states actually provide a lot of security for some of these lesser states here. But going back to China as a revisionist power and America as a hegemonic power, the revisionist power requires a change to the status quo. The hegemonic power does not. So a neutral stance is maintaining the status quo, saying we are not going to change anything. That is also beneficial to the United States. So until this tiering system can be finished, this right now is the state of play that works well for the United States to actually, again, maintain a proper war footing in the event that China moves on Taiwan. China's main goal here will be to infiltrate it, get plenty of assets over here to actually be able to disrupt any kind of supply chains in the Southern Pacific. And that would really actually, it wouldn't stop the United States from conducting war, but it would bottleneck everything into the mid-Pacific and the North. That makes it easier to target, easier to disrupt.
All right, very interesting. And then just briefly, what is the status of the Solomon Islands? Because they have previously shifted toward China. Have they essentially been captured or what?
They're every single thing over in these islands are messy. It doesn't matter which one you look at. The prime minister is very pro-China. Some of his lesser ministers are explicitly pro-Taiwan and don't like that they switched recognition to China. So even internal to the Solomon Islands, there is dispute.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right, Jared, thanks for that. And we do have plenty of questions today. Jared, since I got you, let's just go ahead and jump on this one. Could a Taiwan invasion be a feint for a ground invasion of China's smaller neighbors? Their land forces seem stronger in this regard. It doesn't seem like it would be a feint. Taiwan is definitely the dual objective for China, which is not to say that China would also not have to invade some of its neighbors in order to conduct military operations against Taiwan. Jared, previously that's been your assumption. We're probably talking about maybe the Chinese occupation of some Japanese islands, maybe of some other places in the region. Is that still your assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, could it be a feint? No, I'm going to say it could never, ever be.
Taiwan's got to be the main effort. Yeah. I mean, it is the main effort. Yeah.
Well, it has to be, because if you, as China, reach out and you just pretend to invade Taiwan, which is going to set off a lot of people, because we've covered previously that Japan has said, you will not do that. Like, we will be involved per our national security strategy. You will not touch them. The Philippines, they added it to their national security strategy. And here just today, we covered the Philippine president saying, we're definitely being involved. Don't touch it. Like, you can't feint that. And on top of that, the entire anti-China coalition is built around telling the lesser states, hey, if they take Taiwan, you're next. China will try to reach out and take you. You may not be number 2 or number 3, but they will come after you. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason that's even, that has any kind of weight, is that China has said so. Back in, I think it was 2023, we, at least internally, covered a plan that Xi Jinping himself laid out in 2013, where he said, yes, Taiwan's the first to go. The reason you do that, Taiwan's basically you break in the first island chain and you can project power from there. But from there, the Chinese rejuvenation is reestablishing the borders they lost. And that doesn't stop at, 1947, I believe it was. And it doesn't stop with the CCP. It goes back to when China had the greatest borders. This is a civilizational initiative, not just a governmental initiative. So Mongolia is on the chopping block. Korea is on the chopping block. A pretty big portion of Russia is on the chopping block. Vietnam, we saw the push on Vietnam all the way down through the South China Sea with their now 10-dash line. Yeah.
And that's all the way out to the second island
Taiwan, chain. Yeah. If you pretend to hit Taiwan, all of that goes up. Sure. Nobody will allow that.
All right. Great answer. Thanks for that, Jared. And next question. I saw on social media some geospatial intel that suggests Iran is already starting to continue uranium enrichment. Does the team have any info on this unconfirmed discovery? I would not be surprised. I mean, I said on social media over the weekend, just basically right after the U.S. strikes on Iran, it doesn't matter if it sets Iran's nuclear program back months or years. It just means we're going to have to strike Iran again. That's the argument. The U.S. will be forced to strike Iran again in months to years, however long that takes them to recover. And, I just looking at what's going on between Netanyahu and Trump and Israel and the United States, I don't expect those policies to change. I mean, the United States has enforced now a hard line. The Israelis have also enforced a hard line on not allowing Iran to get nuclear weapons or even get close maybe to nuclear weapons. So I can't confirm that Iran is, but if they are, I mean, it would not surprise me. I don't think it would surprise anyone.
No.
All right.
You look at their main enrichment facility. Yes, that was knocked out. But if I was Iran, I would not have all of my eggs in one basket. Mm-hmm. I would immediately go, okay, well, I've got lesser facilities. They can't produce as much, but they can produce.
Sure. All right. I saw a quick note yesterday regarding China's position. They're going to stop shipping rare earths and stop manufacturing our military contracts and parts. Do you have any info on this? Other than what we said earlier in the show about China slow walking these exports to the U.S., I don't have anything else. Yeah, Jared.
Yeah, they've had no change of status. I just saw this morning that President Trump was saying they still have not confirmed the deal, which means China doesn't have any obligation to retract their restrictions.
Mm-hmm. All right, what level of coercion does the team feel would be necessary to force Russia's allies into believing the juice isn't worth the squeeze in terms of trading with Russia while we're at war? Well, I guess we're going to find out. This is something where the U.S. under Biden had actually, I would say, been successful in its immediate aims of restricting Russia's access to foreign money, obviously to the U.S. dollar, to foreign markets. One thing I talked about that happened, I think in 23 or 24, you had then the deputy secretary of the Treasury, Wally Adeyemo, went to Turkey and threatened Turkey with sanctions if Turkish banks did not disconnect from the Russian mirror payment system. So this was full court press. Let's get every country that we have influence over whatsoever to disconnect themselves from Russia. And we're seeing that still play out. So I don't know, Jared, I'm not a big India watcher. However, we have, I remember saying back a couple of years ago, even Modi is obviously India first. And I'm not sure that I do not see India caving to Trump over tariffs. India has to buy oil. They like buying cheap oil from Russia. And I don't see that stopping.
No, not with tariffs, but if Trump decided to hit the H-1B issue, which I've noticed is coming up a fair amount now, then we could potentially see India shift their focus. That said, India is India first. They have an extremely long trade history with Russia and formerly the USSR. For goodness sake, most of their military equipment to this day is still Russian. Their premier anti-ship missile, the BrahMos missile, is a joint Indian-Russian venture. I don't think we can break that, if I'm being very frank. I don't think that's feasible. Turkey, more feasible. China, also under threat. I think actually the goal there is to push China into Russia's sphere because there is tension between the two of them. They don't talk about it much, but there is tension there.
Yeah, I noticed our chief correspondent in Mongolia says he also has doubts that Trump's India strategy is actually going to cause a break here. let me just say this about H-1B, because I have seen that in the comments and I've seen that on social media. Basically, H-1B being I think such a vital part of India's strategy, of India's foreign policy strategy. They want H-1Bs. They want to send Indians abroad, expand the Indian diaspora, which expands Indian influence and eventually control, I think, probably in some of these countries, frankly. Very similar to what China has done with elite capture, except instead of bribes, it's you have Indians who are in positions of power and influence abroad. That's my own personal opinion. You know, I had this. I used to follow this guy on X, and I had to stop following just because it was too much. He's Indian ethnicity, but he was born in the United States, and he just continually rags on Americans. And, Americans, they're not enough STEM grads. They're not talented enough. They don't have the skills. That's why all these companies are going after high skill Indian H-1B positions and getting these computer science grads from India, because America doesn't have the talent. Number one, I don't think that is the case. I think predominantly it is. If you can pay someone on H-1B 60% of what you would pay an American, that is what shareholders would want. So I think it's an economic issue. But let me just say this. This is the problem with this whole cycle, is you have these companies saying, we cannot find enough talented Americans. And so we have to do H-1Bs. We got to bring over all these tech workers from foreign countries because there's not enough talent in America. And you look at what's happening in the universities. And these universities, they love foreign students because they make more money off of each student than they would allowing an American to go to that university. And so this is the problem when domestically we're not producing enough of these STEM grads and computer science grads to fill these positions. So what ends up happening is because these colleges are not producing enough top tier talent for the workforce, there's a shortage of domestic top tier talent for the workforce. This is what they say. And so they've got to go after these H-1Bs, but that does not solve the fundamental problem, which is we just don't, because of economic issues. So it is, I know many people in Trump's orbit have pushed him to do a lot more on H-1Bs. And I still do think, probably that's in Trump's hand. So with that, next question, Jared.
All right. We got a few from behind the paywall. So what are the team's thoughts on Russian shift from China as a primary ally toward India? Just want to make sure, Omega Joe, we saw that question. I think we pretty much answered that throughout the show. Frozen Nomad, our Mongolian correspondent. Regarding uranium supply in the United States and vulnerability to a supply cutoff from Russia, how many months or years of supply do U.S. nuclear plants typically have available? So do we have strategic uranium reserves? And should they cut off supply to the U.S., do they have ready buyers for it elsewhere?
I don't know that it's way outside my lane.
Robert?
Does anyone want to take a general stab? Otherwise, we'll move on.
From what I could find, the U.S. has about 539 million pounds of uranium reserves. The problem is just domestic production. So that reserve hasn't been increasing apparently, but we do have a pretty significant reserve of uranium.
And as far as buyers outside of the U.S., there are plenty of them. China needs uranium. They're trying to get their own small modular reactor commercial production up and running and just basically run everybody's energy grid. You need uranium for that. Mm-hmm. All right. From Ben T, back when Biden used SWIFT as leverage against Russia, it pushed Russia into the arms of China. Trump has been successful with tariff, but does he risk overplaying his hand? I think we've covered that one pretty well. So that'll cover that for inside. Let me find you one. Oh, here's a good one.
All right, this will be the last question of the day. Is there any reason not to just use counties as districts? Well, part of the problem is that you have 3,000 counties and you don't have 3,000 reps. So I think that's probably one of the biggest hurdles for that. Robert, I don't know. Do you have a better answer?
No, I think that's the answer. There's the states only get so many seats apportioned, and a lot of these states have more counties than seats that they get apportioned.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we'll see. All right, Robert, over 50%, under 50%. Does Texas will Texas be successful in gerrymandering?
They seem to be committed to it. I think that if the special session ends without Democrats coming back, they will eventually have to return to the state. And I think, as you said yesterday, Abbott's probably going to call another special session to get it done.
Oh yeah, he will. If this special session ends on the 19th of August, if they don't have it done by then, he's just going to call another special session for sure. Great point, Robert. All right. With that, everyone, thanks so much for your support. If you'd like to join our mission, become a member here at Forward Observer. Get access to everything that's happening behind the scenes. Later this month, I'm just going to start doing a monthly kind of comprehensive, cumulative color revolution update and talk about, we talk about a lot of things piecemeal on this because it's like, oh, here's this latest puzzle piece. Here's this latest data point. Here it is. But what you don't get when we cover the puzzle pieces is you don't get the full picture of the puzzle, to include timelines and what I think is going to happen and about when it is going to happen. So I'm going to start doing that once a month. We're going to do that here in the next couple of weeks. That is going to be members only. So we would appreciate your support. If you want to get access to that monthly update, do join us, forwardobserver.com. Start a free 7-day trial. And with that, everyone, thanks so much for your support. We will be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.